Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Pinball Arcade. So next table we have is Flight 2000. We've had great success so far in the 80s era. 3 out of 3 really good tables. And so hopefully we see that just continues on. Honestly though, it almost makes an argument to not have even bothered to have any 60 eras or 70s era tables and just start at 80s and go forward. Or, I have no idea when the release schedule of this would have been. It could have been that they did start with 80s and release it. It would be a shame if Gorgar wasn't in the list. It would be a shame if Centigrade 37 is in the list, since that seems to be fairly popular. I enjoyed Big Shot, and I think Central Park being a wooden table does have some historical relevancy, but the rest of them, if they were missing, would be easily replaced with other tables, and I wouldn't have noticed them missing. This may also be the first Stern table we've played. We are definitely waffling in these 1980s tables, where a lot of the tables do have have voice files, sound files that sound like someone talking, but the quality of the lines of dialogue and the audio is very up and down. Flight 2000 from 1980 was the winner of a fan poll in the early 2013 as the classic Stern table you most want to see in Pinball Arcade. Wow, that's kind of self-aggrandizing. It was designed by Harry Williams and was the first talking Stern table. It features a unique 3-ball multi-ball mode, where each ball is launched through 3 separate lift-off stages. This takes place in the upper left playfield, inside a maze-like ball lock mechanism. 6,301 units of this table were produced. And we are back to having the Pro mode, so we can actually look at the table. Now, I'm a little suspect here in the fact that this flyer has what looks like a photorealistic lady sitting on top of the table, which inherently somebody probably has their hand holding her up to take this photo in shadow, or that it was masked out, because sitting like that, she'd almost certainly slide off the table very quickly. But we've seen so far pretty much any game that tries to sell on sex for pinball turns out to be a terrible pinball table. The back of this flyer, you can't even zoom in enough to read it, where I would very much prefer to have been able to zoom in more. Again, though, I am also playing this on a TV screen 10 feet away, so text generally needs to be fairly large if you're going to read it. But yeah, it does seem like it is highlighting a few things, but they wasted a decent amount of space showing off a lady and not even highlighting the table, which we haven't seen a lot of that, really. Usually the flyers are more about actually showing the table off. So, interesting screw there. You get your little bits of an instruction. You see a Stern logo. Stern must have been slightly younger than the other Williams and Bailey. There's no real way to zoom in and zoom out, though, and it feels like you kind of should at this angle, because that is fairly zoomed in. It's kind of hard to even keep it. We have a shoot again, which might be a ball saver. We have a central peg, which is the first table we've seen so far with the central peg. We have an outlane that is completely covered now with plastic and artwork, maintaining the image, which that's nice, because up until this point, all the tables we've seen have had custom art on the tops of things instead of just trying to have a unified image. Maybe that doesn't work for some themes and only works for some others. It would be fairly difficult to align the vinyls, but it kind of doesn't matter. You can see here by the angle of the camera that things won't line up. 2 in lanes that spell BF, and then FO, which I don't know what that is really supposed to spell unless it's blast off. But then the LAST is missing. You have a 5 multiplier in the shape of like a spaceship, and then you have your score on a planet, which is green with stripes, is better than the fireball big circle that took up almost all of the lower playfield. We've got a whole bunch of other score things, but boy, you're so zoomed in. There's a spinner here with a spinner value that increased. There's a lady here with like a toga and a tube. You've got 3 what would be more than likely very difficult side bumper drop targets to hit. So that's going to be fairly crazy. The bumper is pretty much the only way you'd ever hit that. The spinner might hit those, but unlikely. This bumper is offset with this bumper, and then there's kind of nothing on the left side of this bumper. It's just kind of like a drain. Then there's another hidden drop target up here and up there, and then here we have last LAST as in blast. So you can spell blast off, but it's weirdly spelled in a weird way. You would have to hit this, then LAST up here, then O over here, and then F again. There's 3 drop down targets over here, a spinner, a blast off, line up, and then it goes all the way up here and then lands back here to lock the balls. And that's, I don't know if that's supposed to be a second stage target or what, because you drop the ball up this ramp on the left, and it comes down here, and then it gets down to this point, and then it, once it, I guess, has 3 balls, it shoots them back out this way. So you're using a massive amount of space here, if you could actually zoom out to on the table. And the only thing here is this target, and that means that it goes up here and then it goes back this to the second stage, and then the 3 balls would blast that way. That's asking a lot. So you kind of have to get an angle like this just to get a general sense of what this table is. It's one table that, once again, doesn't have a lot going on in the lower play field. It's going to be fairly tough shots by the looks of it to, if you go like center lane up here, maybe you can get the ball to bounce between these bumpers and get into the top lane. Otherwise, you're going to shoot this right spinner quite a bit to get the ball that way, or you're going to shoot this quite a bit, or more than likely you want to just shoot this a ton. Looks like we have a 7-digit score, so honestly that feels like that's more going to be an indicator of just how high the scoring is going to be for each individual hit. Notice this outlane has quite thick custom bumpers, not just a standard peg like this, which is fairly small, or even the slightly bigger peg such as this, which they are depicting that as a hexagon when almost certainly that would have been a circle. And I kind of feel like a lot of these would have just been screws, and yet they're being depicted like they were hexagonal, so they could be used with like a nut driver to be brought in. But maybe that actually was how the table was designed. They don't particularly have a problem with circular imagery for the other things. So, and that is round. Then let's see if we can zoom out. We can kind of see the backboard. but not a lot there. Okay. Well, our pro goals, and then let's start playing sweep the right, drop targets, which I don't know if that means you have to hit all of them or hit all of them very close. Light blast off, score 75,000 point bonus, activate multiple and score at least 750,000, which that is a fairly high number. Now Fireball had a lane changing feature. This seems like it doesn't. And that's not super surprising that a pinball from the same year wouldn't have the exact same ideas at the same time, because if they did have the same ideas, then that either means everybody got together in a conference call and decided on new ideas to add to pinball that year, or 4 years prior when they were developing pinballs for the release in 1980, or corporate espionage was at a very high number, high level. It's going to be fairly impossible to spell blast off. You just are going to have to keep the ball in play. A lot of that is carrying over. It's going to be fairly impossible to get the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 drop targets shot. See, I got 75,000 in that first game between 3 balls. What they're actually asking for you to do here is to do a little bit of everything, or actually not a little bit of everything, absolutely everything on the table. And that is going to be a tight shot up that left target, because you are going practically all the way to the end of the table from the bottom of the table, which arguably I would say pinball tables shouldn't have shots that go the full length of the table. That is just too hard of a shot. And if there is one place where you would want to go on the full length of the table, it would be direct up the center, which would be, geometrically speaking, slightly less than going diagonally towards the corner. I suppose you basically have a skill shot as far as the light up lanes, but you would have to get the ball up there at least one extra time. So that's first stage. And a full plunger shot will always end up in that second hole on the top lane. That's kind of a great example of where a central peg is still not super helpful, it's just slightly helpful. So I'm gonna have to experiment with second stage. I'm gonna have to experiment with either nudging or slightly modifying the launch. See, that was 220,000, so there's something there. I feel like I could spell blast off now if I can just get... Oh, wait, actually, that should have just been a full power shot, shouldn't it have? If I can get just the 4 in lanes lit up. But that is asking still a lot. So this pull shot here should end with the ball there. And so I've spelled blast off. Do you need to spell blast off, or is that just a score multiplier? If it is a score multiplier, it's a fairly difficult one. Well, it can't really be a score multiplier because it's not like those relit after I spelled blast off. First stage. I feel like I've sweeped all of the side targets, but maybe you do have to hit them kind of closer together. No. The side targets are the multipliers. Interesting. At least that was one way to increase the multiplier. Of course, I would know that if I was looking at the instructions. I've got to get really good at this left side ramp. So, it says all systems go, commence countdown. Which I think does mean I need to hit those drop down targets. Which you will hit them fairly often. But I think those are pretty much the only targets that you can hit. There we go. So we've activated multi-ball, which is going to shoot them all at the same time, just a little bit more varied in space. So then the question when in multi-ball is, where is the special? What is the thing we're looking for to hit? Well, it doesn't matter. Multi-ball just ended. We've yet to see a table that resets a, yeah, we really haven't seen a table that kind of resets the multi-ball easily. We do have shoot again. So we're over 1 million points with that. Which certainly a lot of tables like that are kind of annoying in the fact that they take forever to calculate your score. It's supposed to be a reward, but see, I just got another shoot again. Which that's nice. I might be able to continuously get more balls. Still suffering from being pretty bad at that left lane shot. And there's no way you're gonna, with the left flipper, bounce the ball all the way up there. Not very often, at least. I'm still not really sure what lights the drop-down targets on the right so that they get a higher bonus. Notice here how it has to just get faster and faster and faster to save you some time. The high score here is like 2.8 million. We're at 1.3 with just one lucky game. Not bad at all. I wouldn't be surprised though if the wizard goals do want you to potentially get above, much higher above the third score, because the high scores of the table probably are the default high scores anyways. Sweep the right drop targets. Completing all three drop targets in one sweeping shot when the light is lit scores 50,000 points. At the start of the new game, the lamp is off. Each hit on the slingshots here, and here, and here, or here, toggles the lamp on and off. They're not asking you to get 50,000 on it. They're just asking you to sweep that one shot, which pretty much that's in such a weird place that I don't think you'd ever pull that off with much finesse or skill. I think it would just be a random shot. And a lot of the standard goals in this game are like that. A lot of the wizard goals, I'm sure, are even more like that, where you will get it not because of skill, you'll just get it because of persistence. The sweeping drop targets there do kind of scream that they should have been slightly angled differently. Because I cannot really imagine hitting all three of those in one sweeping motion. Particularly since the drop down targets aren't even resetting. So you have considerably less time than it seems like, less opportunities than it seems like to actually try and get that sweep to happen. See, now that that drop target is down, I have to basically hit all of them, all three of them, to bring them back up, then try again. Maybe if you got a multi-ball, you could sweep that targets a little bit easier. But it really does mean sweep. It's not like hit all three targets in less than a second. It means in less than a few milliseconds, hit them. And this is kind of the problem with having the standard goals and extra goals in general. If they're not well thought out, I could easily spend an hour playing this game just trying to get that one shot and not really improving my skills at all for the rest of the table. Like right now I should be improving the left lane shot way more than I should be improving the right lane shot for the drop down targets, because that's not even an important goal. And yet they've added this level of focus, which it kind of makes sense that you might want to encourage someone to do something that is kind of cool, or at least available to be done on the table, but isn't really a main focus of the table. But I kind of feel like that whole idea falls apart. Particularly with later pool tables, pinball tables. I keep calling them pool tables. Because as you get to newer pinball tables, there's just more narrative to your gameplay that you should focus on, instead of trying to get good at every single little drop target it overemphasizes a lot of drop targets, where pinball tables are kind of designed in such a way that where some shots are just there because they wanted something there, and they're not there because it's any important thing. Because otherwise you're going to just have a pinball table that's very, very empty. And even here you still have a decent amount of that, where the lower half of the playfield has basically nothing on it. This is a table that I could see them improving upon just by giving you a third flipper on the left to hit those drop targets if they were going to be a focus, instead of a slingshot. And we've yet to see any kind of ramps or anything, so it's kind of hard to suggest something in the lower playfield right now. The only thing we've really seen that has taken up a lot of a lower playfield has been the spinner, and very few pinball tables actually benefit from having a spinner, because that just adds a level of randomness most people won't appreciate. Like irony, we may very well prove this, that the best way to get the sweep is to just lock in a multi-ball and play that way. Well, I had not spelled blast off, I guess, there. And because I hadn't spelled blast off, I guess I don't get a multi-ball. Which I guess that does indicate that I was fairly lucky to get that multi-ball. I wouldn't call this a great table, but I'm definitely not in the same position where I feel like I hate this table either. This is a table I could happily come back to. It would be a good backup table if all the other tables in an arcade were being played. And at a certain point, at the height of pinball popularity, I suppose there should have been a level of some backup B-tier tables, because they can't all be winners, as it were. But yeah, I'm not feeling great here. This feels like it is just a more complicated version of something like Firepower. It's suffering from some of the same issues of Firepower, where there are some fairly difficult shots and fairly singular ways to activate things. There is a slight nicety in that the scoring is higher compared to Firepower, and that there's just more going on. See, that almost felt like a sweep, and yet that didn't count. I think you probably have to get a sweep, hit all of the drop-down targets while within a certain amount of time that the spinner spins. I bet that's a calculating factor to it. Yeah, even though I'm saying I'm not really loving this table, it's still a table I'm not putting down. I could easily have at this point said, well, that was enough of that table. That central peg has saved me multiple times. Yeah, that's pretty much the #1 improvement you could do to any old pinball table, is just install a central peg. Of course, you're modifying your table at that point, but like, it really isn't going to change much for a lot of scenarios. And I imagine a lot of pinball fans would not even immediately recognize had you modified a table to include a central peg. Whereas any other kinds of modifications would probably stick out like a sore thumb. You can't add a bumper somewhere. Notice that they've also gotten rid of... I imagine we won't see any more instances of the metal wires directly below the flippers, since that really didn't seem like that was ever helpful to the player, nor did it really seem to accomplish much of anything anyways. But yeah, I just can't put down this table. Let's play one more game and then let's enable the pro mode for ball control and see what it really takes to sweep the drop down targets. You're just never going to be able to hit 3 targets in a random shot from the side either. So that's another problem with it. If it had just been 2 drop-down targets, you would have fairly normally randomly hit 2 targets at the same time. I definitely would have appreciated a lane select function. Also would appreciate to remember to use the plunger at different strengths. I don't think a back sweep from the top to the bottom on those would work either. So we spell blast. This is kind of an odd table in the fact that you aren't really getting a lot accomplished, even though you're getting a fairly high score. It does seem kind of disconnected to what you're doing. Right, so operator mode. No, that's not what I needed. Ball control. Interesting. Let's see what the dip switches would be. Special word is extra ball replay, or none, or 100K. A lot more options now. Nowadays, multiplayer resets, leave after drain. Interesting. Specials 1 per game, 1 per ball. Right spinner leaves after drain resets. Match feature on off. Talking feature can just be turned straight off. Interesting. Background sound can be turned off. Let's try that. Spot 1 and F is in off, or 2 Fs. So 1 F means, I assume, that you only have to hit 1 of the Fs in the in lanes. Maximum add-in balls could be 5, which this is the first game we've seen that way. Balls per game. Extra ball or replay. replay is probably better than extra ball, really. Anyways. Some of these features seem like they are good features for the player. Some of these features, not so much. Here we can also see that the tests seem to actually trigger testing some of the slingshots and drop targets and such. And then we've got just a very dingy sound effect playing as we are. Alright, so let's take control here. And let's see if we can hit all 3 balls to cause a sweep. Even controlling the balls is pretty much impossible. There's just no momentum there. I'm pushing as humanly possible on the D-pad to control this. If I'm triggering a sweep, you almost would have to hit it and then sweep downward, because there's just this like angle. Like, let's see if we can simulate this. You come up here and you sweep the angle. I wish you could just slow down time. You're really not going to, in one fluid motion, hit all 3 of those, because there's kind of a jutting out of it, which doesn't make sense. If these were just slightly angled to the tilting towards the left, it would make more sense. Just a 1 or 2 degree difference there might have been something. And then let's see if we can get it to go down the off. And that seemed to light up just... It turned off the light on one of the Fs, but not the others. So they still count those. They're just, I guess, not going to include those. Let's see, ball control there. This definitely feels more like a old school pinball table once you start turning off the audio. And it is still incredibly... They just have no system here. It's like just insanely difficult. I had kind of forgotten about these little targets. They play no role. They're just score targets. Man, this table is tall. Man, yeah, you just look at the momentum there. It is just nothing. This whole table feels like it is tilted at way sharper of an angle than it should be. You can see turning off some of the sounds still doesn't turn off all the sounds. Yeah. So now I'm just going to play for real and play some multi-ball and see how, after doing all that setup, what if we're shooting for the left lane for a special. There were supposed to be 5 balls possibly on the table. I am not seeing that. So I don't know how you would have accomplished that. Because that totally doesn't seem like that's what occurred. Yeah, I kind of wish the ball control feature was A, capable of letting you cheat, and B, way better. Like, what the ball control feature also represents is where your quality assurance probably would go. Because if you were a technician of a real pinball table, you very well might take a pinball and roll it on the table with your hand to hit certain targets, although in most cases you don't need the pinball at all and you can just hit the targets with your own finger. But if say you have a rollover target that's going to interact with the magnetic properties of a pinball, you might need to do that. See, that was like 400,000 or 500,000 bonus. There's still very possibly a wizard score here that would want you to roll the entire score over, and this is definitely one of those tables where that seems like that could happen in a good game. But you can also kind of see how some of these operating menu options are less... They're too technical, and they just kind of change the game slightly, and at a certain point you're getting down to a level of customization and tweaking that just demands more customization and tweaking if you really want to be obsessive about it. And at a certain point, then there's an argument for Pinball Arcade to simply have released their code as open source and let you just create your own table and modify the rules and the coding in it. And I'm sure for the license properties, people wouldn't have really allowed that. Even Pinball FX never offered a create your own table idea. But when you look at the success of Mario Maker 1 and 2, which had its own kind of limitations, just down to Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, or mostly Super Mario Bros. 1 and 3, there is an argument for potentially skinning the Unity engine and dumbing it down just to primarily focus to allow end users, consumers, game players to make their own tables through a drag and drop or grid interface. It wouldn't be as insane as it would have sounded 10 years ago to potentially release a program like that. Plus, if you put the onus on someone else to create something creative, you can get extra life out of a product. Yeah, Pinball Arcade is effectively dead because it lost all of its licenses. Had all of those licenses been supplemented by a create your own table feature, then there would still be some life into this. Let's do one more table. We still don't really know what it would take to do a sweep. And I don't know if I would... I think I stand actually a pretty poor chance of doing a sweep. I can see that the art in the top of the slingshots trying to line up with the table doesn't really line up because you're just always at different angles. You're always gonna be a little to the left, a little to the right on a pinball table. So while it was a cool experiment that I don't blame them for trying, in implementation, it really highlights how the old way was better, to have disconnected art. Plus, there's plenty of room there where they could have drawn an alien character. This is a table that is particularly uninterested in showing you any humans, so it's kind of unrelatable in that. There's just that lady in the tube that is shown on the far right, and that's it. And I don't think you should be particularly targeting an audience of potentially autistic sci-fi nerds who don't want to see humans. But yeah, the whole back glass, it's just let's go back and just highlight this. You have this lady in this tube, and I assume that might be a cryostasis tube. It doesn't feel like she's being transported through a tube. And then you have here nothing where you could have put an alien or a humanoid. You might not have bothered to do anything there at all and just have the wire. And then you have, I guess, a guy in a rocket ship that's very crudely drawn. He doesn't even have a face. And then you have the same guy in the rocket ship over here. I didn't even notice that. But there's empty space here. That could have been something. There's a lot of just stars. That's not terrible. I kind of like that the top is dark, because that's the part you shouldn't be focusing on anyways. There's just a lot of rocket ships and a lot of space planets. And then the backboard is just rocket ships, where it would definitely make a lot more sense to have more people, at least 2 people. And they must have somewhat thought that was the case, because they have a live action person sitting on the table in the flyer, but that didn't make it to the actual game. Well, that's Flight 2000. It's kind of funny, it just always resets me back to the top of the list. We had a decent run there of 3 really good tables, and then the run was broken with one table that's not particularly the greatest, but still I would put it better than, say, Genie or Paragon, which were tables I really didn't like. I didn't really like Wild Card. It would be kind of hard to compare Flight 2000 to El Dorado or Spanish Eyes or Fireball, because those are ones I don't even remember at this point, and I think Flight 2000 also will be one that I don't remember. But we are just 2 balls away from Black Hole, which is a name I recognize, so I think that's a fairly good table. And that's not saying this next table won't be good too, even if it turned out that all the tables going up to Pinbot are bad, which would be kind of a shock, that the first 3 would be good, and as the years went down to 81 and 82, they started getting worse. I am almost 100% sure that Pinbot is a good table. I'm fairly certain Haunted House is a good table. Seems like there's a sequel to Firepower, which you would assume that if they're going to make a sequel to a table or make another table called Firepower, it would more than likely be a very good one. There is probably an argument here to talk about the copyright of names and trademarks of names in pinball tables just being fairly unenforceable or non-existent, whereas nowadays, if you were to make a game called Rage, for instance, there is a game called Rage and a sequel called Rage 2, but those are titles that, legally speaking, you you probably couldn't trademark or copyright, but there's still big enough games and influential enough games, and with the internet and history and memory being a little bit longer, it would be fairly crazy to make a new game called Rage, even though it might be a decent name for a game. Although, in all fairness, most video games do often have too simplistic of names and then they get lost in the shuffle. And we have yet to hit a point in video games or even in the pinball tables we've looked at where they might call themselves Williams Rage or Stern's Rage or Bailey's Rage and put the name of the company in front of it, or call table Rage Balls of Fury, have a subtitle to it. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.